In the summer of 2017, the sun blazed high over the Bitterroot Mountains, casting long golden fingers across the pines and valleys. It was the kind of place where people went to lose themselves in nature or to disappear entirely. Logan Weller was 22 years old, a third-year biology student at the University of Oregon. He was quiet but curious, the kind of young man who never missed a class, who called his mother every Sunday, and who hiked for clarity more than thrill. That June, Logan had joined two of his old high school friends, Brett Thompson and Mason Dwyer, on a week-long backpacking trip through the Montana wilderness. It was meant to be a reunion of sorts. The three had drifted apart after graduation, and Logan, more grounded than the others, had hesitated before agreeing. But the photos they sent him of sun-soaked peaks and winding trails had tugged at something dormant in him. They set out on a Monday, parking at a remote trailhead and leaving behind cell service and civilization. For the first few days, things went according to plan. Clear skies, long hikes, cheap trail food, and the easy laughter that comes when old friends try to pretend nothing has changed. But something had changed. Mallory, Logan's younger sister, would later recall how tense he'd sounded during a brief call from a ranger station before they hiked deeper into the range. "It's fine," he had said when she asked how it was going. "They're different than I remembered." On the fifth night, they made camp near a glacial stream. According to Brett and Mason, Logan had left the tent around 10 p.m. to relieve himself and never returned. By morning, panic had set in. They spent hours shouting his name, retracing their steps, checking the nearby slopes and riverbanks. When that failed, they hiked out, a grueling 9-mile trek back to where their truck was parked, and reported him missing to the county sheriff. Logan's parents, Patrick and Diane Weller, received the call just after noon that Sunday. They had been in the kitchen, preparing lunch. The phone rang, and life split into before and after. Patrick dropped the plate he was holding when he heard Brett's voice. Diane sank to the floor. Their son, their boy who had never broken a bone, never skipped a final, was gone. Not injured, not delayed, gone. The official search began within hours. Local authorities, forest rangers, and search and rescue volunteers poured into the region. Dogs sniffed the underbrush. Helicopters scanned the slopes. Every creek bed and ravine within 5 miles of the campsite was combed. No footprints, no dropped items, no signs of a struggle or animal attack. On the second day, they found Logan's water bottle partially buried under a drift of pine needles a mile from camp. Oddly, searchers swore the area had already been checked the day before. It was the only physical trace ever found. Brett and Mason repeated the same story to authorities. Logan walked into the woods and never came back. They hadn't argued. He hadn't been acting strange. He just left and vanished. But something about it all felt wrong. Mallory didn't believe them. Neither did Diane. Mothers know things. Diane became obsessed with the time. 10 p.m. Why so late? Why walk so far into unfamiliar woods without a flashlight? She would later tell reporters, "I felt it. The moment he disappeared. I knew something terrible had happened, but not something natural. Something we weren't meant to understand." The search lasted 10 days. Then it scaled back. Then it stopped. Logan Weller's case was labeled missing under unknown circumstances. The file was marked cold. His name joined a long, quiet list of people swallowed by the wilderness. But Mallory kept searching, because brothers don't just disappear, not without a reason. And 8 years later, when a stranger uploaded a family photo from across the country, one with a familiar face standing quietly in the background, the impossible started to make sense. The first 24 hours after Logan's disappearance passed in a blur of chaos, static, and unanswered questions. After Brett and Mason stumbled into the ranger station, dirty, panicked, and breathless, the local sheriff's office launched a Level 1 search. The boys recounted their version of events with mechanical precision. Logan had stepped away from the campsite late Saturday night, saying he needed to relieve himself. He didn't take a flashlight, a jacket, or any gear. Well, he didn't return after 15 minutes. They thought he was playing a prank. By the time they realized something was wrong, the night was too dark and the terrain too treacherous to search safely. At first light, they looked for hours. Then they made the decision to hike back to the truck and call for help. The authorities acted quickly. A team of 6 search and rescue officers arrived that afternoon, followed by volunteers and canine units. The weather remained clear, sunny skies, mild winds, perfect conditions for a successful recovery. But as the hours passed, hope began to fray at the edges. By the evening of the first day, Logan's parents arrived in Montana. Patrick Weller, tall and broad-shouldered, even in his 60s, stood silent as the sheriff briefed them. Diane clutched a photo of Logan, his college yearbook portrait, the one where his smile looked slightly forced, and refused to sit. She kept asking the same question. Why would he walk off into the woods alone at night? No one had a good answer. The campsite was combed. The surrounding area was mapped and divided into grid sections. Helicopters circled overhead while searchers fanned out through dense pine forest and steep inclines. Every hour that passed without a sign of Logan deepened the dread. On the second morning, searchers discovered a single item, Logan's Nalgene water bottle, lying beneath a thin carpet of pine needles near a dry creek bed. The location had been checked the day before. No one could explain why it hadn't been seen then. The bottle wasn't dirty, scratched, or broken. It looked recently placed. When questioned again, Brett and Mason repeated their story almost word for word. Logan had seemed fine. Tired, maybe. Quiet. But not upset. They hadn't argued. There was no alcohol, no drugs. They were planning to hike out the next day. It had been a normal night. Too normal, Diane thought. The precision of their retelling disturbed her. No one, especially 2 20-something guys under stress, should sound that rehearsed. Every pause felt measured. Every detail perfectly aligned. Did you hear anything? Anything strange? She asked them directly. No, Brett said quickly. Nothing. Just quiet. But Mason hesitated. He looked like he wanted to speak, then swallowed and nodded along. Patrick noticed. The sheriff's department conducted background checks. Neither Brett nor Mason had any criminal record. There were no signs of struggle at the site. Logan's pack was untouched, his belongings still rolled neatly inside. His journal, which he often carried on hikes, was zipped into an outside pocket. The last entry was dated that morning and read, "Beautiful place. Clouds like ghosts. Brett still acts like he owns the air. Mason's jumpy. I'm ready to go home." Authorities found no evidence of foul play, but no evidence of voluntary disappearance either. There are no signs that Logan had staged anything or left clues. His phone had been off for days, likely due to the lack of signal. It was as if the forest had swallowed him. By the 4th day, media outlets picked up the story. College student missing in Montana wilderness. Diane watched the coverage with her jaw clenched, her eyes dry and burning. She didn't want headlines. She wanted her son back. Patrick kept walking the search perimeter. Every hour, every day, his boots wore down to the soles. His knuckles bled from gripping trees to steady himself on hillsides. And then, as quickly as it had begun, the noise faded. By the 10th day, the sheriff told them that unless new evidence emerged, the official search would wind down. Volunteers dwindled. Reporters moved on. A missing poster fluttered from a nailed-up board at the trailhead, already sun-bleached and curling at the edges. Logan was gone, and in his place, there was only silence. The story Brett and Mason told never changed. Logan had walked off into the woods, to relieve himself around 10:30 p.m. and never came back. That was it. No arguments. No strange behavior. No sound of an animal. No rustle in the underbrush. Nothing unusual at all. It was too clean. Too rehearsed. At first, everyone chalked it up to shock. After all, it's not easy to relive the moment your friend disappears, especially when you're the last ones to see him alive. But as the days dragged on and the search yielded nothing, the cracks began to show. Mallory Weller was 17 at the time, sharp-eyed, stubborn, and fiercely protective of her older brother. She'd flown to Montana with her parents and refused to leave their side. While her parents met with law enforcement and helped coordinate search volunteers, Mallory watched Brett and Mason. Watched them closely. She noticed how Brett always did the talking. Mason would stay quiet, nodding at everything Brett said, but rarely adding anything of his own. And when she asked questions directly, simple ones like, was Logan acting weird, or did he say anything before he went? Mason would shift uncomfortably, looking at the ground or toward Brett before answering. Something about it fell off. On the third night after Logan disappeared, Mallory cornered Mason by the motel vending machines. He looked tired, not just from the search, but from something deeper. She handed him a bottle of water and asked again, gently this time, what really happened out there? Mason didn't meet her eyes. You want to take a piss? That's it. You're lying, she said, not accusing, just stating it. You're scared. Of what? He flinched. You don't know what you're talking about. She stepped closer. Did you fight? Did he say something? Did you see something? Mason shook his head, too fast, too defensive. No, I didn't. None of us did. He just disappeared. And then he turned and walked away. The next morning, Mallory told her parents what she'd seen in Mason. The hesitation, the guilt. Diane believed her instantly. Patrick wasn't sure. The sheriff listened, but without evidence, there wasn't much they could do. Still, the authorities had quietly noticed the same thing. During separate interviews, Brett and Mason repeated details word for word, an unusual occurrence unless they'd gone over the story together multiple times. The timing, the phrasing, even the gestures, all too aligned. Brett had an answer for that, of course. We've been over it so many times, it's burned into our brains, he said. We talked about it nonstop. Of course it sounds rehearsed. We were there. It was plausible, maybe even true, but it still didn't sit right with Mallory. On the fifth day of the investigation, a ranger named Alan Dupree, a retired Army tracker turned Forest Service consultant, approached Patrick discreetly. He had been leading the search teams along the ridge lines above the creek bed where the water bottle had been found. I don't usually say this kind of thing to families, Alan said, his voice low. But I've been doing this for 30 years. Kids run off. Hunters fall. Hikers make dumb choices. But they leave something. A trail. A scent. An echo. He paused, eyes narrowing. There's nothing out here. Not even a bad decision. It's like your boy was plucked from the ground. Patrick didn't know how to respond to that. Mallory, listening from behind the open motel door, suddenly felt her chest tighten. That night, she wrote Logan a letter. She didn't know why, maybe just to feel like she was doing something. I don't believe them, she wrote. I don't think you just walked away. I think they know more than they're saying. And I'm going to find out. She folded the paper and tucked it into her backpack. Grief doesn't arrive like a thunderclap. It seeps in like cold air under a door, slow, quiet, and relentless. After the search was called off and the last rescue workers drove away, the Weller family returned to their home in Bend, Oregon, with one fewer heartbeat and no answers. What remained was silence. Heavy, suffocating. Patrick Weller stopped speaking unless absolutely necessary. He went back to work at the fire department after just 2 weeks, but he barely spoke to his crew and never mentioned Logan. At home, he'd sit in the garage for hours on end, pretending to fix things that didn't need fixing. The television stayed on, but muted. The lights were always dim. Diane, once the warmest woman on the block, collapsed inward. She began sleeping in Logan's room, claiming it made her feel closer to him. But in truth, she was afraid to let it go. His backpack still lay in the corner, half-zipped from his last hike weeks before the Montana trip. His worn flannel jacket was folded on the chair. His cologne still sat unopened on the dresser. She didn't touch a thing. Not one sock. Not one scrap of paper. Mallory was just 17, a senior in high school with college applications and prom dresses looming in the distance. None of it mattered after that summer. She'd come home to a house that no longer sounded like her family. Her parents, always affectionate, no longer hugged. They didn't even make eye contact for long. Meals were eaten in silence or skipped altogether. The worst part? No one talked about Logan. Not really. Not beyond the basic facts. The memorial was small and subdued. No funeral, because without a body, Diane refused to call him dead. But after that day, it became taboo, as if saying his name aloud would make the pain worse, or admit something final. Mallory tried once. It was 6 months after Logan vanished. She'd come home from school to find her dad sitting at the kitchen table, staring at a mug of coffee he hadn't touched. "Dad," she asked gently, "do you think we'll ever know what really happened?" Patrick didn't look up. "He's gone, Mal. But don't you wonder. He's gone." That was the end of it. From then on, Mallory kept her thoughts to herself. She journaled in secret, obsessively rereading news articles, printouts from the sheriff's department, topographic maps of the Bitterroots. She emailed Brett and Mason once, got no reply. A year later, she tried again. This time, Mason responded with a short message. "Please stop. It's not going to bring him back." Resentment began to fester. She resented the silence, the hollow rituals of family dinners with 3 chairs instead of 4. The holidays where Diane would hang Logan's stocking anyway, then pretend she didn't cry when it stayed empty. But most of all, Mallory resented the quiet agreement that none of them could move on. The house grew quieter, colder. Diane developed insomnia and spent nights cleaning already spotless counters. Patrick grew angry at small things, broken remotes, burnt toast, loud commercials. Mallory avoided coming home altogether, staying late at the library or walking through town long after the sun had set. By the time she graduated, the house was just a place where ghosts lived. And when she left for college in Portland, she didn't cry. She didn't promise to visit often. She hugged her mother quickly and barely met her father's eyes. There were no heartfelt speeches, just a nod, a shared understanding that something had ended long ago, and none of them had the words to say what it was. Years passed. They still sent birthday texts. They still mailed Christmas cards. But the threads that had once bound them as a family had frayed and snapped, leaving only polite obligation in their place. Logan's disappearance had taken more than a son. It had taken the shape of the family itself. Time, people say, dulls pain. But for the Weller family, it didn't dull, it froze. Logan Weller remained 22, frozen in photographs, in memory, in the sharp ache behind his mother's eyes every time she passed his bedroom door. No new memories replaced the old. No new milestones arrived to soften the loss. Only dust gathered on frames, on shelves, on the days that kept moving forward without him. 5 years, then 6. The authorities officially declared him dead in year 7, a move the family fought quietly but didn't contest publicly. There was no evidence of foul play, no remains, just a timeline with a missing center. Diane never stopped clinging to the idea that Logan might come back. She watched every documentary on missing people she could find, stories of hikers found years later, amnesiacs recovering identities, survivors crawling out of the wild. She read every thread online, Followed forums filled with people like her, parents, siblings, spouses clinging to vanished faces. Patrick gave up on hope much earlier. He believed something tragic had happened in those woods. An accident, maybe a fall, a mistake that cost Logan his life. What broke him wasn't just the not knowing, it was the futility. No matter how many hours he spent scanning trail maps or reading terrain reports, nothing changed. He stopped visiting the sheriff's department. He stopped asking questions. Mallory, now in her mid-20s, tried to live. She earned her degree in environmental sciences, found a job with a conservation nonprofit in Portland. She dated. She broke up. She smiled. But Logan was always there, not just in her memories, but in her instincts. When she walked into the woods on a weekend hike, she'd stop at random points and look over her shoulder, half expecting to be there. When she passed a man in a hoodie with the same build, her heart would spike before her brain caught up. Sometimes she dreamed of him, not always as a ghost or memory. Sometimes as if he'd never left. He'd sit across from her at the kitchen table, grinning, talking about something mundane like coffee or basketball. When she woke, there'd be a split second, just one, where she forgot. But then the morning would arrive, and Logan would be 22 again. The sightings were the worst. Every year or so, someone would reach out, a call from a small town, a message from a backpacker, a blurry photo from a distant airport. Each one ignited a fragile hope, and each time, the crash hurt more than the last. One man had claimed to see Logan working at a gas station in Idaho under a different name. Mallory drove 4 hours only to find a kid who looked similar from a distance, and nothing more. There was the woman in Missoula who swore she'd seen him on a bus. The park ranger who found a shoe that might be his. None of it panned out. Each false lead chipped away at what little trust Mallory had left in other people. And still, Logan remained missing. There were no answers, no notes, no signs, just the lingering, impossible question that had haunted them from the first day. How does someone disappear without a trace? By year 8, Mallory had stopped checking the forums. She didn't reply to reporters anymore when the anniversary came around. She packed away most of Logan's things into sealed plastic bins stored in the garage. Her mother wasn't ready to throw them away. Not yet. But it was a start. She was learning, slowly, to live alongside the loss. Not past it, not through it. Just with it. It started with a message that could have easily been spam. Mallory had just come home from a long shoot in the Columbia River Gorge. Her boots were still muddy, and her camera bag lay forgotten by the door as she collapsed onto the couch, exhausted. She wasn't expecting anything important. Most people didn't message her directly unless it was about work. But the subject line caught her attention. "Is this your brother?" The sender's name was unfamiliar. A woman named Janine, no last name, no location, just a short email with an image attached and one line of text. Took this photo while hiking near Wallace, Idaho. The man in the background looks familiar. I posted on a travel group, and someone said he resembled Logan Weller. I Googled the name. Thought you should see this. Mallory's pulse quickened. She clicked on the image. It was a casual vacation shot, taken by someone who clearly wasn't a professional. A woman smiling at the camera, squinting into the sunlight. Behind her, the edge of a forested trail. Pine trees, a rocky incline, and a figure. A man, partially blurred by depth of field, but not enough to hide the details. He wore weathered hiking gear, boots caked with dust, a dark green jacket, a canvas backpack slung over one shoulder. His beard was thick, streaked with gray. His face was tanned, rugged, slightly thinner than Mallory remembered. But she knew that face. Her breath hitched. The photo wasn't fake. It wasn't edited. She zoomed in, hands trembling. The man wasn't looking at the camera. He was turned slightly away, gazing toward the tree line, unaware he'd been captured. But even in that accidental posture, something about him radiated familiarity. The curve of his jaw, the shape of his ears, the way he stood, leaning on one leg as if balancing an old injury. It looked exactly like Logan. Older, alive. Mallory couldn't move. For a moment, the world became perfectly still, as though the photo itself had stolen the air from the room. She opened a folder on her laptop, found the last photo she had of Logan, taken just a week before he disappeared. He was 22, clean-shaven, standing barefoot in the backyard, holding a garden hose like a sword, laughing at something their dad had said. She placed the images side by side. The resemblance was undeniable. But could it really be him? She responded immediately. Where exactly did you take this? What date? Do you remember what trail? The answer came 20 minutes later. Wallace, Idaho. Silver Basin Trail. Last Saturday, I was on a solo trip, hiking before sunset. I took this with my phone, didn't even notice the guy until later. Wallace, less than 60 miles from where Logan had vanished 8 years ago. Mallory's hands were cold. Her heart was thudding. She sent the image to her mother and father. Diane called within minutes, her voice shaking. It's him. Patrick, it's him. Patrick didn't say much. He simply asked, what do we do now? Mallory didn't know. What could they do? The man in the photo might be Logan, or he might not. But the chance, after 8 years of silence and dead ends, felt like a crack in a sealed vault. She reached for her car keys. She was going to Idaho. Whatever the truth was, it was no longer buried in the past. It was walking through the mountains right now. Wallace, Idaho was the kind of town where time moved slower. Mallory felt at the moment she stepped onto the main street, where antique shops sat next to aging diners and everyone seemed to know everyone's name. But she wasn't here to admire the charm. She was chasing shadows. She started with the diner. It was the only one near the trailhead of Silver Basin, where the woman claimed to have taken the photo. The place had a faded sign and cracked leather booths, and smelled like coffee that had been brewing since the 70s. Mallory approached the counter with a photo of the man from the hiking picture, printed out and worn at the corners. Have you seen him? She asked the waitress, a woman in her 60s with tired eyes and a sharp memory. The woman squinted. Looks like Cal. Cal. Quiet guy. Comes down every couple of months. Always alone. Orders black coffee and blueberry pancakes. Pays cash. No phone. Mallory's heart pounded. When did you last see him? The waitress thought for a moment. Maybe 2 weeks ago. Sat right over there. She pointed to a window booth. Didn't say much. Just seemed kind. Mallory thanked her and left a generous tip, even though she had more questions than answers. Who was Cal? Why that name? If it was Logan, why wouldn't he come home? From the diner, she made her way to the ranger station. There, she asked for access to guest logs, a long shot but worth trying. To her surprise, one of the rangers recognized the name Cal. Saw that guy hiking alone more than once. Keeps to himself. Doesn't like people asking questions. He signs Cal R. Never last name. Mallory stared at the logbook. Sure enough, over the past 2 years, there were 4 separate entries with that name, all around the same area. Each time, the same crude handwriting. Always alone. No emergency contact. She copied the dates and locations. Each log entry matched roughly with a reported sighting Mallory had found online in hiker forums. Blurry background figures and photos. Campers who mentioned a weird loner. A man seen reading by a fire at a remote overlook. Piece by piece, a picture was forming. But it wasn't solid. It was like tracing footprints through fog. Just enough to follow, but never enough to see the whole figure clearly. She found a receipt next. Pinned to a bulletin board at a local gear shop. Someone had left a backpack for repairs and forgotten to pick it up. The shop owner let her take a look at it. The name scribbled on the tag. Cal R. Inside, Mallory found well-worn trail maps with handwritten notes, a compass, a tin of matches, a folded photograph. She hesitated before opening it. It was a picture of her, at 17, smiling, holding Logan's hand, standing by the Bitterroot trailhead the summer before he vanished. Mallory felt dizzy. If this was really Logan, why had he been watching them all these years? Why hadn't he come back? Her search was yielding more than she bargained for. This wasn't just about finding a missing person anymore. This was about understanding who he had become. Because something was off. The people she spoke to all said the same things. He was polite, distant, cautious. But there was always that one word that came up again and again. Afraid. As if he was running from something. Or someone. She folded the photo and placed it in her pocket. The path forward was no longer just physical. It was psychological. Whatever had happened to Logan, it hadn't ended in those woods 8 years ago. It had started there, and Mallory was about to walk straight into it. The forest had grown thicker the farther Mallory hiked. The trail had disappeared hours ago, replaced by a network of game paths and guesswork. Her legs ached, her lungs burned, but she kept moving, driven by something deeper than determination, something primal, a mix of hope and dread. Then she saw it, a red ribbon, tied loosely around the branch of a pine tree, fluttering in the wind. Just like the ranger said, 50 yards ahead, almost invisible among the trees, was the cabin. It was small, one story, weathered by storms and sun. Moss crept along the roofline. The windows were dusty, one of them cracked. There were no signs of electricity, no wires, no satellite dish. Just a sliver of smoke curling from the metal chimney. Mallory approached slowly, half expecting someone to yell or come running out. But the clearing remained still, silent. She climbed the 3 wooden steps and stood before the door. No lock, just a wooden handle and rusted hinges. Her fingers hesitated over the latch. This was it. She pushed the door open. The smell hit her first, cedar, smoke, something faintly herbal. The kind of scent that clung to flannel and skin. The cabin was dim, lit only by the fire crackling in the stone hearth. A kettle hissed gently nearby. Books lined crude wooden shelves. A handmade table held a map weighed down by river stones. And sitting in an old armchair beside the fire, reading a paperback novel with a worn cover, was a man. He looked up slowly as the door creaked. Gray threaded through his beard. His hair was longer now, tied back loosely. His eyes were clear but distant, like looking at someone through glass. Mallory stepped inside. Her voice trembled as she said it. Logan. He blinked. Calm. Not surprised. Not shaken. Hello, he said, closing the book. She stared at him, struggling to breathe. It's me, she said. Mallory. No recognition. Nothing in his face changed. Not even a twitch. I think you've got the wrong person, he said gently. Her heart dropped. No, she whispered. No, I don't. I'm your sister. He rose slowly, hands relaxed at his sides. You'd better sit down. You look like you've walked a long way. She did, numbly. Her legs gave out beneath her as she sank into the wooden chair near the table. He poured tea into a chipped mug and handed it to her. How long have you been out here? She asked, her voice cracking. A while, he said. Lost track, to be honest. You're Logan Weller. You disappeared in 2017. You were hiking with your friends, Brett and Mason. You were 22. You had a scar on your left elbow from falling off your bike when you were 10. I was there. He frowned slightly, as if trying to place a half-remembered dream. Then, quietly, I don't remember any of that. Mallory felt the room tilt. What do you remember? He looked at the fire for a long moment. Waking up in the woods. Alone. With no idea who I was. There was a trail, a bag, and a note. She stared. A note. He nodded. It said, start fresh. Don't look back. Her breath caught. He wasn't lying. She could see in his eyes. He believed it. Someone, or something, had erased his past, and Logan Weller had become Cal R. She gripped the mug tighter, the heat anchoring her to the moment. This was him. This was her brother. But he didn't remember her, didn't remember himself, and whoever had left that note didn't want him to. He called himself Caleb. That was all he knew. Mallory sat across from him at the small wooden table, her mind racing, but her face frozen. Caleb, Logan, whoever he truly was, sat calmly sipping tea like they were strangers sharing a bench in a park. "I woke up near Cougar Peak," he said, as if telling someone else's story. It was early spring, snow still on the ground. My head was bleeding. No wallet, no phone. Just a pack with some granola, a knife, and a scrap of paper. Mallory swallowed. The one that said "Start fresh. Don't look back." He nodded slowly. "Yeah, I thought maybe I wrote it to myself. Or maybe someone left it for me. I don't know. I barely made it to the creek before I passed out again." He leaned back, eyes fixed on the flames. "A guy found me. Live about 10 miles out. Off-grid. People around here called him the Hermit of the Basin. Never got his real name." Mallory leaned in. "And he just helped you?" Caleb shrugged. "Didn't ask questions. Fed me. Taught me how to live off the land. Said people come out here to disappear, not to be found." Mallory blinked. "How long were you with him?" "Maybe a year. Then he got sick. Died the following winter. After that, I took over his cabin." A beat of silence passed. "And not once," she said softly, "did you wonder who you really were?" Caleb looked down. "Every day. At first, I used to stare at the fire, hoping something would come back. A face, a voice, but it never did. And after a while, I figured maybe it was better that way." Mallory felt tears sting her eyes. "Your name is Logan Weller. You grew up in Missoula. You had a black lab named Frankie. You used to draw spaceships in your math notebooks. Your best friend was Mason until the day you vanished. He didn't move. You disappeared 8 years ago," she went on, voice cracking. "We searched. For years. You were 22. I was 17. His brow furrowed. A flicker. Something flickered. A tremor in his jaw. A breath that hitched a fraction too late. "I'm sorry," he said. "I want to believe you. I really do. But none of that means anything to me." Mallory reached in her backpack and pulled out the photograph, the one of them, side by side, just before his hike. She slid it across the table. He stared at it, his eyes locked on the younger version of himself, hand resting protectively on his sister's shoulder. For a long moment, he didn't speak. Then, quietly, "That's me?" "Yes," she whispered. He picked up the photo with trembling fingers. His face paled. "I don't remember this. But that face. I can feel something, like a pressure, in my chest." He closed his eyes. "I used to dream of a girl. Blonde. Always crying out for me from the woods. I thought I imagined her." Mallory's breath caught in her throat. "I thought maybe I'd lost someone," he murmured. "A wife. A daughter. But now..." She reached across the table and took his hand. "You lost yourself, Logan. But I found you." His hand didn't pull away. They sat in silence for what felt like a lifetime. But under that silence, something stirred, a fracture in the wall he'd built around his mind. A question neither of them dared voice yet. Why was his memory taken in the first place? Because amnesia didn't just happen, and notes didn't write themselves. Mallory didn't leave the cabin. Not after finding him. Not after almost losing him again to the silence in his mind. She made a bed on the floor using her sleeping bag and an old wool blanket she found in the corner. By day, she boiled water, cleaned chopped wood. By night, she talked to him, sometimes for hours, even when he barely responded. But she refused to go. "I'm not letting you disappear twice," she said quietly. She brought out everything she had packed for this. Faded photos, Logan's old sketch pad, a copy of The Martian Chronicles by Ray Bradbury, the book he'd read 10 times in high school. She even showed him a family video on her phone, the only one she still had saved. Logan at 17, dancing like an idiot in their backyard while their mom screamed with laughter off camera. He watched it with wide eyes. Then, softly, that laugh. I know that laugh. The change was subtle, but it was there. He began to speak differently. Softer. Slower. His brow furrowed more often. Once, he reached for the book and turned to a random page, his finger tracing the words as if he remembered something but couldn't quite reach it. And then, the dreams began. They're getting louder, he said one morning, sitting on the cabin steps, watching the sun bleed through the trees. Voices. A girl calling me. Laughter. Dogs barking. I see trees, but different ones. Brighter. He looked at her. I think they're memories. Some nights, he would wake up soaked in sweat. Mallory would sit beside him, hold his shoulder, whisper that he was safe, that she was there. Then, one night, everything broke. She heard him muttering in his sleep, tossing violently. No, wait. Mallory, I'm coming. She knelt beside him just as he jolted upright, eyes wide, gasping. And then, through a cracking voice, Mallory. He looked straight at her, not past her, at her. She nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks. Yeah, I'm here. He clutched her like a drowning man clings to the surface, and sobbed. Big, broken sobs, the kind she hadn't heard since the night he'd disappeared, when she'd screamed into her pillow until her throat bled. I remember the trail, he whispered. I remember saying I'd be right back. I remember the way the air smelled. But then, he pulled back slightly, eyes wild. Something grabbed me. Not physically, like my brain split open. I got dizzy, like I was falling. Then nothing. She held his face in her hands. You're coming back, she whispered, bit by bit. He nodded. But why would I forget everything? Who would do that to me? That question hung in the air like smoke. Because this wasn't just trauma. This was erasure. And someone had wanted it that way. The next morning, Mallory found something wedged behind the cabin's stone hearth. A small metal box, nearly rusted shut. Inside were scraps of paper, a compass, a photo of the hermit standing beside a younger, clearly confused Logan, and a torn page from a journal. Scrawled in shaky handwriting. He doesn't remember. Better that way. Safer. If they knew he survived. Mallory stared at it, then looked back at her brother, still sleeping by the fire. Whatever had happened 8 years ago wasn't just an accident. It was a secret, one someone had tried very hard to bury. The doctor was kind, with soft eyes and a cautious voice. She met them in town, 2 hours from the cabin, in a clinic that smelled of antiseptic and pine air. Logan, or Caleb, as he still reflexively called himself, sat stiffly while she examined him, asked questions, ran simple cognitive tests. After a quiet hour, she leaned back in her chair and folded her hands. Dissociative amnesia, she said gently, likely triggered by extreme psychological trauma. Mallory glanced at her brother. His face was unreadable. It's not uncommon, the doctor went on, especially when the mind decides that remembering is more dangerous than forgetting. But what kind of trauma could do that? Mallory asked. To erase everything. The doctor hesitated. A violent event, or one tied to overwhelming guilt. Sometimes the brain just shuts the door. A door. That was how it felt to Logan. Like something had been locked inside him for years, slowly banging to get out. And now, each time he looked at his sister and an old photo, at a tree he knew he'd seen before, the door creaked open a little more. Back at the cabin, Mallory found a notebook tucked under the mattress. One he'd apparently started keeping months earlier, when the dreams had become unbearable. Most of the pages were disjointed, messy sketches of trees, rough outlines of mountains, strange symbols that looked almost tribal. A child scrawl, a soldier's code. Mallory couldn't tell. But then she found one page that chilled her blood. They said I couldn't go back, that I knew too much, that if I remembered, others would come looking. I don't remember what I saw, but I remember being afraid. She read the line again and again. Logan, who is they? She whispered aloud. He was chopping wood nearby. When she showed him the page, his hands trembled. I don't know, he said, but his voice was thin, shaky. Another page read. Metal in the ground. Voices underground. A man with one eye. I ran. Mallory's heart thumped. Do you remember writing this? He shook his head. No, but I remember the feeling. Like I was being hunted. Watched. Not by an animal, by people. That night, Mallory pulled out her laptop and went down the rabbit hole, scanning old local news articles, fringe blogs, lost Reddit threads about government experiments and abandoned Cold War bunkers rumored to be hidden in the Bitterroot Mountains. And then a hit. A decommissioned military listening post from the 60s, buried in a section of forest only a few miles from where Logan had vanished. Classified, forgotten, and supposedly sealed. The next morning, Logan said something quietly over breakfast. I keep dreaming of red lights. A hallway. Cold air. I think I was underground. She looked up, and someone said to me, "You don't get to walk away." Silence fell between them. Whatever had happened to him wasn't just an accident in the woods. It had a location, a purpose, a witness. And that witness had become a threat. Mallory closed the notebook and stared into the fire. She'd come here to find her brother. Now she realized she might have uncovered something bigger than both of them, something someone never meant to surface again. It came in the form of a voicemail, unexpected, shaky, and nearly drowned out by the sound of traffic. Mallory, it's Brett. I don't know if you'll even listen, but I need to tell you what really happened. I can't carry this anymore. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. She played it 3 times before she could breathe properly. After 8 years of silence, Brett, one of Logan's closest friends, was finally talking. They met in a diner on the edge of Missoula, under the hum of flickering fluorescent lights. Brett looked older than his 29 years, gaunt, eyes red, fingers trembling as he stirred a cup of untouched coffee. I've thought about this every day, he said, not looking at her. I lied to everyone, to the cops, your parents, myself. And so did Mason. We were cowards. Mallory didn't speak. She just listened, afraid that if she interrupted, he might fold back into silence. It wasn't a bathroom break, Brett said. That's not why he left the camp. He glanced up at her, face pale. We saw lights in the trees, flickering, strange, silent. We thought it was a ranger at first, or maybe another group. Logan wanted to check it out. He was curious, you know? Always had that thing for the weird and unexplained. Mallory nodded faintly. That sounded like him. He said, "Stay here. I'll be back in 5. Brett's voice cracked. But then we heard this sound, like metal tearing, like a hum inside our skulls. It hurt. We both fell to the ground. When it stopped, Logan was gone. Mallory's stomach turned. We called for him, screamed, searched, for hours. And then we found footprints, but they didn't lead back. They just vanished, like someone lifted him off the ground. Brett stared down at his shaking hands. We waited until morning, and then we panicked, made up the bathroom story, told it so many times we started to believe it ourselves. Mallory leaned forward, voice barely a whisper. What do you think he saw? Brett looked at her, haunted. I don't know, but it wasn't just lights. Something moved. Something watched us. He swallowed hard. There was a sound before Logan disappeared. A deep thump. Not thunder, like a vault door closing. Mallory sat in stunned silence, her mind racing. The symbols in Logan's journal. The sealed Cold War facility. The voices he claimed to hear. The warning. They said I couldn't go back. And now this. Confirmation that something unnatural, or at least deeply hidden, had been in those woods that night. Brett reached into his coat and slid a small, folded map across the table. We marked the spot back then, just in case. We told ourselves we'd go back and figure out when we were ready. We never did. Mallory unfolded it slowly. The X was marked in red, just north of the old Ranger Road, the same region where the government facility had supposedly been buried. What if he didn't just run, she said aloud, more to herself than to Brett. What if someone made sure he disappeared? Brett's eyes met hers. Then you need to be careful, Mallory. Some things don't want to be found. She rose without another word, tucking the map into her bag. Her heart thundered as she stepped out into the cold night air. For the first time, she had a location, a truth, and possibly a reason why her brother's memories had been stolen. It was time to go back to the place where it all began. But this time, she wouldn't be afraid to follow the lights. The homecoming was quiet. No news crews. No dramatic embraces in the rain. Just a tired man standing on the front porch of the house he'd left behind 8 years ago. Not by choice, not by will, but by something darker. Something still unnamed. Mallory watched her mother open the door. For a moment, Sarah Weller didn't move. Then she let out a breath, more a sob than a sigh, and pulled her son into her arms. Her hands trembled as she touched his face, as if she were afraid he might vanish again. His father stood behind her, tears in his eyes, saying nothing. Caleb, Logan, returned their embraces stiffly, cautiously. The memories were coming back in shards, not floods. Faces he'd once known now lived in fragments. A voice in his mind still whispered, "You were never supposed to come back." But he had. The town reacted with disbelief. People stared. Some whispered. Others reached out. Mason never responded to Mallory's messages. Brett left town a week after their meeting. His guilt had cracked open a truth that had festered too long. Mallory tried to let her brother settle in, tried to let peace take root. But the questions gnawed. Why'd he been erased? Who were they? And what exactly had he seen in those woods? One afternoon, she sat beside him on the porch swing. He was staring into the distance, a cup of tea in his hands. "Do you remember anything else?" she asked gently. He nodded slowly. A voice, mechanical but human, telling me I'd compromised something, that I wasn't supposed to witness it. "What did you see, Logan?" He turned to her, eyes heavy with something between fear and certainty. People underground. Not military. Not normal, either. There were machines, big ones. It felt like a test. A test. He shrugged, like they were trying to open something. And I saw it. I think they used me. Mallory felt the hair rise on her neck. That night, she went back to the journal. Paged through the sketches, the broken lines, the strange symbols. One page near the end caught her eye. It looked like nonsense at first. Overlapping circles, jagged arrows. But when she held it up to the light, something hidden emerged. A faint watermark. A set of coordinates. She entered them into her laptop. They led to a section of the Bitterroot Mountains, just west of the abandoned listening post. A zone now marked restricted access on federal maps. And the date next to it? Just 3 days before Logan disappeared. That was when Mallory knew this wasn't over. Finding Logan had been the first chapter, the emotional victory. But the true story was just beginning. Someone had taken her brother's past. Someone had buried evidence in those mountains. And now that Logan had returned, Mallory was certain they wouldn't let it go. She bought a camera, a drone, a thermal scanner. She began mapping timelines, digging into declassified archives, reaching out to people who specialized in lost government projects, quietly, carefully. Because whatever Logan had witnessed wasn't just an accident. It was a secret, one powerful enough to erase a life and almost get away with it. But they didn't count on a sister who wouldn't stop looking. Not then. Not now. Because Mallory Weller wasn't done asking questions. And this time, she wasn't afraid of what she might find.